March 2026, a date that will be carved into the history of human exploration, not because of a rocket launch, not because of a landing, but because NASA quietly stopped playing defense and started playing for keeps. For 30 years, we watched the American Space Agency drift, caught in political currents, starved of vision, afraid to fail. But behind closed doors, something cracked, something broke, and then something ignited. ACT 1. The Ignition Event. It was a Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. gray skies, the kind of bureaucratic silence that usually precedes another press conference about budget extensions and delayed timelines. But when Jared Isaacman, the new administrator, a name few politicians wanted but every engineer respected, stepped to the podium at NASA headquarters, the room knew something was different. Behind him, projected in stark white against a black screen, a single word: ignition. Not partnership, not sustainability, not the usual verbal Novocaine that had paralyzed space enthusiasts for decades. Ignition. That word is a threat, a promise, a door slamming shut on the old way of doing things. Because here is what Isaacman said in so many words, without the diplomatic filter that has choked NASA since the last space shuttle landed. The status quo is dead. For years, decades, NASA tried to be everything to everyone. They wanted to please Congress. They wanted to please international partners. They wanted to please the commercial sector. And in trying to make everyone happy, they accomplished almost nothing of consequence. Billions of dollars evaporated into contracts that went nowhere. Years of progress evaporated into endless reviews and safety panels and redesigns. Isaacman stood in front of that word, ignition, and did something no NASA administrator has done in living memory. He admitted failure. Not the failure of the astronauts, not the failure of the engineers, the failure of the system itself. A system so afraid of losing that it forgot how to win. But here is the question that should send a chill down your spine. Why now? Why, after 3 decades of drift, did someone finally decide to light the match? Because there is someone else on the moon. Or rather, there will be. Soon. Act 2. The Ghost of Apollo. The space race of the 1960s was a sprint. A manic, terrifying, glorious sprint driven by nuclear anxiety and national pride, flags and footprints. Get there first, plant the banner, leave, never come back. That race ended. And for 50 years, the moon became a museum, a ghost town of abandoned landers and decaying footprints. But something has changed, something that the mainstream media is not talking about because it sounds like science fiction, but it is not fiction. China has announced their intention to establish a permanent presence at the lunar South Pole by 2030. Not a visit, not a research station, a permanent presence. A base, a foothold, a strategic high ground that controls the ultimate frontier. And here is the part that kept NASA's old leadership awake at night. The old NASA was going to lose, not because of bad engineers, not because of bad astronauts, but because of bad strategy. The old Artemis plan was a beautiful disaster, a Rube Goldberg machine of unproven vehicles, impossible timelines, and conflicting priorities. The Lunar Gateway, a space station in orbit around the moon, was supposed to be the linchpin. But it was a solution looking for a problem, a way to spend money without taking risk, a way to look busy while going nowhere. Isaacman looked at that plan and did something radical. He tore it apart, and then he rebuilt it from the bones up. ACT 3. The unthinkable. Reset. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because the first thing the new NASA did was cancel the moon landing. Not forever, but for now. You heard that right. Artemis 3, the mission that was supposed to put boots on the lunar surface for the first time since 1972, has been reformatted, stripped down, reimagined, and that sounds like failure, like delay, like the same old NASA. But listen closely. The old plan had Artemis 2, a simple 4-day shakedown cruise of the Orion capsule around the moon, jumping directly to a full landing using an unproven human landing system. That is the equivalent of teaching someone to drive in a parking lot and then entering them in the Indy 500 the next day. The risk was so catastrophic, so blindingly obvious, that the launch date became a joke. A can kicked down a road that never ended. So the new plan does something brilliant in its simplicity. Artemis 3 will now be a dress rehearsal, but not around the moon, in low Earth orbit, just a few hundred miles above our planet. Here is how it works. The Orion capsule launches. The lunar lander, whoever builds it first, launches separately. They meet in Earth orbit. They dock. The astronauts transfer into the lander. And then, in the relative safety of home territory, they test everything. Life support, communications, propulsion, the new EVA suits, the airlocks. If something breaks, and something always breaks, they are hours from home. Not days, not weeks. They can abort. They can fix. They can learn. This is not a step back. This is a step sideways that allows a giant leap forward. And here is the knife twist that nobody saw coming. Isaac Mann looked at SpaceX, the golden child, the darling of the space world, and said, in so many words, you are not safe. For years, the assumption was that the lunar lander would be Starship. A done deal. But the new NASA has reopened the competition. Blue Origin is back in the ring with their Blue Moon lander. And the rule is brutally simple. Whoever is ready first flies first. The contract you won 3 years ago means nothing. The renderings you published mean nothing. The promises you made mean nothing. Only execution matters. That single sentence changed everything. AST-4, the tempo of war. The deadline for Artemis 3 is now 2027. Next year, not 2028, not 2030, next year. And here is where the psychology of the new NASA reveals itself. Once the lander is certified, the winner will have months, not years, to test it in an uncrewed moon landing and then turn around a human-rated version for Artemis 4. Artemis 4, scheduled for early 2028. That is when American boots hit the lunar South Pole. But here is the number that should make your pulse quicken. Artemis 5 is scheduled before the end of the same year. 2 landings. 1 calendar year. Do you understand how insane that sounds? The last time NASA attempted that tempo was 1969. Apollo 11 landed in July. Apollo 12 landed in November. 120 days between first contact and second contact. That was not luck. That was an industrial machine operating at the edge of human possibility. The new NASA is trying to rebuild that machine. From 2028 onward, the plan is 1 crewed landing every 6 months. A relentless, rhythmic, almost mechanical pulse of human presence on another world. This is not exploration anymore. This is occupation. Act Phi, the gateway that never was. You remember the Lunar Gateway, right? The planned space station in orbit around the moon. The $5 billion detour that was supposed to be the staging point for everything. Scrapped, not canceled. Scrapped is too gentle, repurposed, dismantled for parts. Isaac Mann looked at the gateway and asked a simple question. Why are we building a station in orbit when we do not even have a tent on the ground? The answer, of course, was politics. The gateway was a jobs program disguised as a space program, a way to keep international partners happy, a way to look like we were doing something while doing nothing. So the new NASA did the unthinkable. They took all the hardware already developed for the gateway, the habitation modules, the power systems, the docking ports, and redesigned them for surface use. The first moon base will be built from the bones of a station that never flew. That is not waste. That is resourcefulness. And the budget for this 7-year construction project is $20 billion. To put that in perspective, that is less than Americans spend on Halloween decorations every year. That is less than the cost of 1 aircraft carrier. That is, in geopolitical terms, pocket change for control of the ultimate high ground. Act 6. The 3 phases of conquest. Here is where the story becomes a blueprint, a roadmap, a countdown clock. Phase 1, 2026 to 2028, the proving ground, 25 missions, 21 landings, the single most aggressive launch cadence since the Cold War. But this is not just about getting there, it is about staying. The moon has a problem that most people do not think about because we are spoiled by Earth's 24-hour day. On the moon, the sun rises and then stays up for 14 days, and then sets and then stays down for 14 days. 2 weeks of light, 2 weeks of darkness. And during that darkness, the temperature plunges to negative 200 degrees Celsius. Without heat, every machine freezes. Electronics crack, batteries die. Metal becomes brittle as glass. So NASA is sending nuclear power to the moon, radioisotope thermal generators, plutonium decaying at a steady, predictable rate, no moving parts, no maintenance, just heat. Constant, life-giving heat that keeps the machines alive through the long night. And what machines? Let me introduce you to Moonfall. Not a rover, not a lander, a rocket drone, based on the Ingenuity Mars helicopter, but instead of propellers, which do not work in a vacuum, it uses small rocket thrusters. Each hop lasts 150 seconds. Each hop covers 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers of vertical cliffs, deep craters, mountain peaks that have never seen sunlight, places no rover can reach, places no human can walk. Moonfall will go there, and it will stream everything back, which brings us to a detail that Isaac Mann buried in the briefing, almost as an afterthought, but which might be the most important part of the entire plan. Every vehicle, every drone, every rover, every electric car, all of them equipped with high-quality cameras, and all of them live streaming their missions to Earth. For free, for everyone, for the whole world to watch. Because the new NASA understands something the old NASA forgot. You cannot inspire people with press releases, you inspire them with spectacle, with danger, with the raw, unfiltered feed of a rocket drone falling into a crater on another world. Phase 2, 2029 to 2032, the Foundation, 27 launches, 24 landings. This is where the toys go away and the work begins. 6 new rovers, but not the little Sojourner-style rovers you remember. These are excavators, bulldozers on the moon, machines that move rock, level ground, dig trenches for power cables and pipelines. And one of them, built by Japan in partnership with Toyota, is something entirely new. A pressurized mobile habitat, 15,000 kilograms, an apartment on wheels. Astronauts inside will wear short-sleeved shirts. They will sleep. They will eat. They will live for days at a time, moving at 3.5 kilometers per hour across a landscape no human has ever seen. The rover has a 10-year lifespan. It can operate for 150 hours in total darkness. That is not a vehicle. That is a home. And it will be powered by something that sounds like science fiction but is actually just good engineering. Nuclear fission reactors on the moon. Not the experimental reactors of the past. Real, operational. Kilowatt-generating reactors that will power multiple habitats simultaneously. By the end of Phase 2, the moon will have a power grid. Phase 3, 2033 and beyond. The permanent presence. 4 people. 28 days. A rotating crew living in connected modules, like the ISS but on solid ground. 8,000 kilograms of food, water, and air delivered every month. Nuclear power. Water extracted from shadowed craters. Oxygen to breathe. Hydrogen for fuel. And then 3-dimensional printing, lunar dust, melted down, reformed into cement. The first genuinely permanent structures on the moon. Not tents, not inflatables, buildings. This is the part where most people shake their heads and say, impossible. Too hard, too expensive, too far away. But that is exactly the point. Act 7th. The psychological truth. Isaac Mann stood in front of that word, ignition, and said something that did not make the headlines but should have. He said, "We are not doing this because it is easy. We are doing this because it is hard." You have heard that before. John F. Kennedy said it in 1962. But here is what Kennedy did not say, because he could not. The Cold War had not revealed its full shape yet. The real reason we go to the moon is not the moon. The real reason is the generation that watches. Every engineer at SpaceX today was a child watching the space shuttle. Every scientist at Blue Origin was a teenager watching Pathfinder land on Mars. Every kid in a classroom right now, watching a live stream of a rocket drone flying over a lunar crater, is a potential future astronaut, a potential future inventor, a potential future leader. But those kids will never do impossible things if they do not have impossible things to aspire to. For 30 years, NASA gave them nothing. Bureaucracy, delays, cancellations. A space program that looked less like adventure and more like a funeral. The new NASA is giving them something different. A story, a battle, a race. A reason to look up. Conclusion. The city on the moon. China is coming. That is not fear-mongering. That is fact. They have announced their base, their timelines, their ambitions, and for a long time they believed they would win by default because the old NASA had forgotten how to run. But the old NASA is dead. What rose from those ashes on that Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. is something we have not seen in decades. An agency with a spine, a plan, a deadline. and a single word burning on a screen behind a man who refused to make excuses. Ignition. The fire has been lit. The race has begun. And for the first time since Neil Armstrong took that small step, the outcome is no longer certain. But that uncertainty is exactly where greatness lives. If you want to see what the city on the moon will look like, the permanent habitats, the nuclear-powered rovers, the three-dimensional printed buildings rising from the gray dust, then click the box on your screen right now. Because the future is no longer a promise, it is a launch date.